In light of a recent lawsuit levied against Harvard University's admissions office by the Students for Fair Admissions, alleging that the university's admission practices result in anti-Asian discrimination, many are calling into question the moral legitimacy of the practice of affirmative action in college admissions. Hello everybody, and welcome to Buzz's Roundtable, where today we will be delving into the hot topic that is affirmative action. Now we're just going to start by going around the table and quickly introducing ourselves.
My name is Arnold Wang. I'm a computer science major.
Hey, my name's Arnold Liu, and I'm an industrial engineering major.
Good morning, my name is Manisha, and I'm an electrical engineering major.
Hi, my name is Deepak Akkara, and I'm a computer science major.
And my name is Thomas Barone, and I am a second-year mechanical engineer. Now, let's start off by asking the question, why is affirmative action a practice that is widely used today?
Well, affirmative action exists in its current rendition for a multitude of reasons. Colleges tend to choose to employ the concept of race in college admissions as affirmative action because of an effort to make sure that the qualities they provide to all of their applicants are actually equal, regardless of many of these factors: race, gender, sexual orientation. And that might come off as ironic, but it's all part of an effort to equalize a field that may have been disheveled in previous centuries by minority exclusion. African Americans, for example, have a long history in the civil rights movement of fighting for equal rights. Affirmative action is also alternatively called positive action, and in the good view, it actually just is that. It is a force that seeks to right any negative doings that society may have committed in the past that would explain why current minorities may have unequal opportunities compared to the majority of Caucasian Americans or Asian Americans, as in recent news.
Yeah, so I think that it's important to note that both in the United States Supreme Court rulings of Fisher 1 and Fisher 2, that it's been ruled by the United States judicial system that seeking diversity and seeking a diversity of viewpoints in colleges is a good and permissible goal. So I think the goal and the intention here isn't really the issue. It's really about how it's done. And one of the things that they found in the court rulings was that if race wasn't considered in the discussion and in the efforts to increase diversity, then it usually wasn't very effective. And it's important to note that although race is an imperfect proxy for personal experience, that every person has their own personal experience, that by and large there are sociological trends that depend on race. For example, a 2010 study published in the Child Development Journal found that certain races had higher social costs for high academic achievement. And these social costs often align with stereotypes that resided both within their communities and from without their communities about them. So at the end of the day, there are a lot of social issues and a lot of social differences that underlie the high school, the K through 12 education landscape. And colleges, they want to include people from all different walks of life. They want to be able to include the perspectives from a diverse range of individuals. And that's one of the reasons why they use affirmative action. And they use race as a proxy to understand these individual experiences.
Okay, well, I guess the question now becomes, does affirmative action work to promote diversity on college campuses?
Yeah, it does. Factoring in race as a metric for college admission race is never the sole metric that determines whether or not a student is admitted into a college, but having it play a part does work to increase diversity in the college environment. And there is a question of whether or not these admitted students are correctly matched to the colleges they are admitted to, and a Stanford Law Review article argues that yes, it is. Carl?
Yeah, I also think it's pretty good at achieving its goals. whether it kind of depends on the implementation, how you go about achieving that goal. As Arnold mentioned, the best ones, they use a holistic review, so they take into account, they do take into account your race and maybe your socioeconomic background, but they try very hard to see what part of yourself you put out in your essays, and they try to get a good understanding of you from your extracurricular activities. But I think that's when it's properly implemented. When it's poorly implemented, it can still achieve the diversity goals set out for it, but sometimes those goals turn into quotas, and sometimes the way that we achieve those quotas is by arbitrarily or assigning different point values to races, or like filling percentage quotas, and that is where it becomes problematic, and that's where the courts have decided that that's not a permissible implementation of it. So at the end of the day, colleges, they have the resources to achieve the goals they want to achieve, but it's really about how are they going about doing that.
Now, while I do understand the fundamental idea behind affirmative action to foster a representative population in college campuses and to extend the opportunity to attend a certain school to those who may not have had access to a well-funded primary education system, what I don't understand is how the current system can still be seen as a merit-based or holistic admissions process. In light of the recent Students for Fair Admissions v. Harvard case, in which a group of students alleged Harvard of discriminating against Asian applicants, admissions demographics from the university have surfaced showing that when compared to white applicants, Black applicants receive an SAT score adjustment of about 310 points on average during the application review process. Hispanics receive a bump of 130 points, all the while Asian applicants receive an average 140-point decrease in adjusted SAT score. Put simply, Harvard, a world-renowned university universally recognized for excellence in academic performance, is admitting students with far substandard academic performance strictly on the basis of race, meanwhile rejecting admission to students with strong academic prowess again on the basis of race, all in the interest of artificially controlling campus population demographics. According to the Boston Globe, quote, "Some call it the bamboo ceiling of racial quotas, telling stories of Asian American students with perfect SAT scores and GPAs turned down by elite colleges who limit the number of Asians they will admit, effectively forcing them to face a higher bar for admissions than other racial groups, including whites. The result is companies like Ivy Coach, which serves as advisors on how to get students into elite colleges, training Asians to appear, quote, less Asian on their applications in order to boost their chances of admission. How can one look up to Harvard to be a community of highly intelligent scholars, a prestigious university comprised of the top students in the world, when their affirmative action plan offers a 20% academic boost for one demographic and a 10% academic reduction for another based strictly on race? Title IV of the Civil Rights Act expressly forbids racial discrimination and preference in admissions, stating, quote, "No person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance." Pew Research Center found that 73% of all Americans believe that race should play no role in college admissions, with solid majority representations of Black, Hispanic, and Asian Americans in agreement. While at its core, affirmative action is meant to level the playing field for all applicants by accounting for potential racial inequalities throughout an applicant's life, the majority of Americans agree that this process is unnecessary and wrong. The application process, which is meant to measure one's likelihood for success at a given institution, has been tainted by affirmative action. Affirmative action is a form of racial discrimination which places race above academic excellence, admitting less qualified students to prestigious institutions, thus weakening the overall academic strength of the institution, and rejecting more qualified students, again weakening the academic strength, but also crushing the dreams of the hardworking and well-qualified, discriminating against them based on their race, which is not only regarded as wrong by the majority of the population, but is also illegal in the United States due to the Civil Rights Act. Now, Manisha, I'd be interested in hearing your take on the subject of discussion.
I believe while colleges are trying to spread diversity into their colleges, at the same time they take it a bit too far, and it's often represented as forced diversity. Some even pass the point where they are advocating diversity and start to use it like, we need to make sure everyone knows we are not just one race. I clearly remember a few days ago I stumbled upon NYU's website, and I realized that on the first page, their home page, they talked about a statistic of the percent of African Americans that go to their school. I know in today's discussion we're specifically talking about Asian Americans, but this is clearly a solid example of the college system using African American students as a way to show the public that their prestigious school doesn't have any Asians or white people. This statistic was not even on the admissions page, and that's why I was taken aback. There's a fine line between where college admissions are genuinely combating racial injustice and where they're just trying to show forced diversity. And with this, I have my research that shows some of the prestigious universities, and I noticed a trend that each of these institutes promote the minority acceptance rate. For example, Columbia with 28% of Asian or Pacific Islanders, MIT with only 17%, Duke with 21%, UCLA with 28%, Berkeley with 40%, Harvard with 23%, and Georgia Tech with 31%. Asians applying to Harvard receive an average of 140 points decrease in adjusted SAT scores, while blacks receive an increase of 310 points. So there's clearly a discrepancy between the different races and the different applicable points that you can get on a standardized test, and this is clearly not fair to all.
Then it definitely seems that Asian Americans are being marginalized or being grouped in with the Caucasian majority of America, which is in contrast to the fact that they are still an ethnic minority in America, albeit one that is high achieving and kind of ignored when we're talking about minority underachievement. How do you feel about that, Deepak?
Well, I think you make a good point, Arnold. As far as it goes in America, when you consider minority races, you usually think of African Americans and Latinos much before you think Asians, and most people don't even think Asians are really like a minority in terms of their achievement in schools and in jobs. One interesting statistic actually is that when you look at the pay per dollar, an Asian man actually does make more money than a white man on average in America. However, I feel like Asian Americans are ignored as a minority race. When you look at history, everyone knows about the injustices that the African Americans have suffered, the Latinos have suffered, and the Native Americans have suffered in America. However, the suffering of Asians in America and the racism toward them has never really been talked about that much in schools or in the country in general. People seem to ignore that there were great acts of racism by the U.S. government, such as the Chinese Exclusion Act, as well as the Japanese internment camps, which both are examples of racism toward Asian Americans. However, they are not factored in when you're looking at college admissions, as Asian Americans are not given any benefit due to those factors. In addition, the seemingly quotas on Asian American students in college admissions is reminiscent of the quotas on Jews in the 20th century, in which only a certain number of Jews would be allowed to be admitted to a certain school.
Right, and I would wager to say that this racial quota idea was considered wrong back in the mid-1900s, as it would be considered wrong in today's society. I think the key takeaways here are that, yes, affirmative action is a well-intentioned program with good promise for righting the wrongs of the past and present, but from a macroscopic point of view, one cannot ignore the inherent flaws in the system as it is currently implemented. One argument to be made is that socioeconomic status would be a more accurate gauge of one's opportunities throughout life, as this would account for lack of adequate funding while minimizing the influence of one's race and ethnicity in the scrutinous assessment of college admissions applications. But where one door closes, another opens, as this would potentially result in socioeconomic discrimination, which also goes against the constituted American rights. While this is a difficult issue to tackle, I think it is an important one to discuss openly to increase awareness of both the root cause that affirmative action seeks to alleviate, as well as the implications that affirmative action presents for advancing racial discrimination. And for that reason, I'm glad that we got the opportunity to discuss this issue today. I hope you, as listeners, were able to take away some valuable information, or at least food for thought, and I hope that you continue the discussion and help advance this issue towards resolution. This has been Buzz's Roundtable, and I thank you all for listening. Until next time, signing off.